while New York woke to another day of billion-dollar deals and executive meetings. Sarah Jenkins had already been on her feet for 3 hours, not in a corner office with a view of Manhattan debating corporate mergers, but in the waiting room of a Brooklyn hospital, holding her feverish son's hand, unaware that every minute she was late would be tallied not as maternal love but as professional failure by a man who had forgotten what it meant to be human. Dawn in New York had a particularly cruel quality for working single mothers. The silence was filled not with rest, but with the endless mental list of everything that needed doing before the city burst into its habitual frenzy. Sarah Jenkins watched Ethan sleep in their small Brooklyn apartment, his 12-year-old face marked by a fever that refused to break, his small lungs working harder than they should in the bedroom they shared. It was at 4:17 in the morning that she made the decision she knew would be costly. The pediatrician had said to watch him for one more day, but Ethan's temperature would not drop below 39 degrees Celsius, and that rough cough rang like an alarm in a mother's ears. She called the hospital emergency line, her voice a whisper so as not to wake the neighbors in the old building where they lived. "Bring him to the hospital." "Mrs. Jenkins," the nurse said from the other end, professional but tired. "It may be the start of bacterial pneumonia." Sarah looked at the clock, at 4:23. Her 8 o'clock meeting with Mr. Thompson, the chief executive officer who tolerated no lateness, not even for medical emergencies, felt like a sentence drawing near. She remembered the last assistant who arrived 12 minutes late because of the subway, fired on the spot, no explanations, no second chances. As she waited for the ride share that took its time coming to Brooklyn at 4:30 in the morning, her mind did the math that working mothers across the United States know intimately. Every minute late equals a look of disapproval in the corporation. Every explanation about a sick child sounds like an excuse in a culture that prizes productivity over well-being. Every maternal priority reads as a lack of professional commitment in America's workaholic world. At the hospital, hours passed with the peculiar slowness of the American healthcare system. Ethan, now awake and frightened by the medical procedures, gripped her hand with a strength surprising for his 12 years. "Mom, you are going to be late for work," he whispered, his voice weak but heavy with a worry no child should carry, the worry of being a burden to a mother who already worked so hard. Sarah smiled, hiding the knot of anxiety in her stomach as she watched the heart monitors. "Do not worry, my love. What matters is you getting better." But Ethan knew his mother better than she knew herself. He saw the dark circles that makeup could not fully hide after years of sleepless nights, the fingers tapping nervously on the Coach bag she had bought at an outlet, the eyes drifting to the iPhone clock every 5 minutes. He knew that every blood test, every minute waiting for the X-ray, every prescription represented not only concern for his health, but a real risk to their livelihood in the most expensive city in the country. Meanwhile, in the Innovate Corp offices in the heart of Manhattan, Mr. Thompson began his day with the military precision that had made him one of Wall Street's most successful businessmen. His office on the 40th floor, with its view of Central Park, reflected his mind, organized, efficient, with no space for emotions that might hinder productivity or quarterly profits. He looked at his calendar on the MacBook Pro, an 8 o'clock meeting with Sarah Jenkins to review last quarter's reports. Punctuality was not just an expectation in his company, but a core value that separated serious professionals from amateurs. Mr. Thompson did not hate lateness on a whim. He hated it because in his Midwestern childhood, every minute late meant a missed family meal, a wasted chance to escape poverty. His obsession with punctuality was the shadow of a boy who learned that the American dream does not wait for anyone, and that compassion was a luxury those pursuing success could not afford. At 7:58 in the morning, Sarah finally left the Brooklyn hospital with Ethan, diagnosed with acute bronchitis, but stable with the correct medication. She ran to the nearest subway station, her high heels, bought at Zara and already showing the wear of daily use, striking the concrete with a rhythm of desperation. Her iPhone buzzed, a message from David, her compassionate colleague. He is already in the conference room. Looks like he had 3 espressos. Good luck. Sarah swallowed hard. It was 8:22 in the morning when she reached the Innovate Corp building in Midtown Manhattan. Every step toward the express elevators felt like a walk to the gallows. She knew that no explanation about Ethan would be enough. For Mr. Thompson, professional commitments were sacred in the corporate world, and anything that threatened them was heresy punishable by immediate dismissal. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, she saw Mr. Thompson waiting on the other side of the glass lobby, his arms crossed over a tailored suit, his face a mask of professional disappointment. In his eyes, she did not see anger, she saw something worse. The silent judgment of a man who had already decided she was dispensable in the competitive Manhattan market. And in her mother's heart, Sarah knew she was about to pay the highest possible price for choosing to care for her sick child, the price of her own livelihood, the roof over their heads in Brooklyn, the future she had fought so hard to build in the land of opportunity. Maternal sacrifice, she would soon discover, is always invisible until the moment it becomes painfully visible, and at that moment, in America's relentless meritocracy, it is either understood or punished. And Mr. Thompson was far more prepared to punish than to understand. At 8:24 on that morning that began with maternal concern and would end in professional despair, Sarah Jenkins faced not only her boss's disappointment, but the complete collapse of her financial stability, all because a man who had never had to choose between caring for a sick child and keeping his job decided that punctuality was worth more than humanity in a world where success is measured in dollars, not compassion. The lobby on the 40th floor of Innovate Corp had the peculiar silence of places where power is exercised without emotion. The air conditioning whispered promises of efficiency. Italian marble reflected ambition without human warmth, and the employees who passed by avoided eye contact as if Sarah's vulnerability were contagious. Mr. Thompson remained motionless, his eyes fixed on her like a predator assessing its prey. "Miss Jenkins," he began, his voice not loaded with anger but with the calculated coldness that had made his company one of the most profitable on Wall Street. "It is 8:24. Our meeting was at 8 o'clock. In my company, time is more than money, it is credibility." Sarah felt her legs tremble, but she held her posture. "Mr. Thompson, I can explain. My son." He raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "I am not interested." "Sarah." Everyone has a story. Everyone has an excuse. I am interested in results, and punctuality is the most basic result I expect from my employees. David, watching from a nearby desk, made a movement as if to intervene, but a glacial look from Mr. Thompson made him step back. The others in the lobby lowered their eyes to their screens, pretending not to hear the public humiliation unfolding. My son had an acute bronchitis episode before dawn. Sarah insisted, her voice trembling but determined. We had to go to the hospital. He is 12. Mr. Thompson. He had a 39 degrees Celsius fever. Mr. Thompson smiled, not a smile of understanding, but the condescending smile of someone who believes he stands above such mundane concerns. Sarah. I have children too. And I learned that to succeed in this business, you must set your priorities. And in my priorities, professional commitments come first. The irony of the statement echoed in the quiet lobby. Mr. Thompson had children, yes, raised by a team of nannies and sent to the best private schools in New York, where he saw them on weekends between international meetings. His experience of parenthood was as distant from Sarah's reality as Manhattan was from Brooklyn. I understand that punctuality is important, Sarah said, fighting to keep her composure while she felt tears burn her eyes. But it was a medical emergency. My son could not breathe properly. Mr. Thompson walked to his desk and picked up a document that was already prepared, the termination agreement. The gesture was so calculated that Sarah realized he had decided before she arrived. The 8 o'clock meeting had not been to review reports, it had been to carry out a sentence already pronounced. At Innovate Corp, we have standards, he said, extending the document. And standards exist for a reason. If we start making exceptions for every family emergency, we will soon be running a daycare, not a billion-dollar corporation. Sarah looked at the document, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold it. The severance clauses were generous: 1 month's salary, benefits extended for 30 days. Mr. Thompson was meticulous even in dismissals, ensuring there was no legal basis for dispute. But for Sarah, the money did not matter. What mattered was stability. The health insurance that covered Ethan's expensive medications, the apartment she could barely afford even with her current pay. Please, Mr. Thompson, she pleaded, her professional dignity collapsing under the weight of maternal desperation. I need this job. My son, his medication, the rent. He looked at her with an expression that was almost pity, but not enough to change his decision. Sarah, the business world is no place for sentiment. If you cannot reconcile your family responsibilities with your professional ones, perhaps you should reconsider your corporate career. The words landed like blows. David, unable to remain silent, finally intervened. Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, Sarah is one of our best employees. She always delivers. David. Mr. Thompson interrupted, his voice now edged with warning. Your loyalty is admirable, but misplaced. We are running a company, not a charity club. Sarah looked around at the faces, some with genuine compassion, others with relief that it was not them, most with the practical indifference of those who had learned that surviving on Wall Street means not getting emotionally involved. She saw her world come apart, not just the job, but the belief that hard work and dedication would be rewarded. "I have worked here for 6 years," she whispered, still holding the termination papers. "I have never been late before. I have never missed a day without notice. My son is asthmatic. Mr. Thompson." He could barely breathe before dawn. Mr. Thompson sighed, as if tired of explaining the obvious. "Sarah, understand, this is not about whether you are a good employee. It is about principles. And one of my core principles is that personal emergencies must be handled outside working hours, or through the appropriate human resources, HR, channels." The coldness of the response was more devastating than anger. Mr. Thompson was not being cruel out of malice. He was being cruel out of conviction. He truly believed his stance was morally correct, that protecting the company's standards justified destroying the life of a single mother and her asthmatic son. As Sarah signed the document with trembling hands, each stroke of the pen felt as if it tore not only paper, but the fabric of her stability. She looked at Mr. Thompson one last time, her eyes meeting his in a moment of painful clarity. "One day, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice now steady and clear, "you will discover there are things more important than punctual meetings and quarterly reports. And when that day comes, I hope someone has more compassion for you than you had for me today." She turned and walked toward the elevators, her back straight despite the despair consuming her inside. Mr. Thompson watched her go, his face showing not regret, but the satisfaction of someone who believes he has done what was necessary. What he did not know, what he could not know, was that Sarah's words were not a curse but a prophecy. And that the same child he had considered a professional inconvenience was about to become the solution to the greatest problem his company had ever faced. The moral lesson was being planted in that moment, like a seed germinating in the shadows until ready to bloom under the brightest, most unflinching light, the light of truth that eventually reaches those who judge without understanding. As Sarah Jenkins packed her things into a cardboard box in the Innovate Corp lobby, her heart heavy not only with the unemployment ahead, but with the humiliation of being discarded as if her years of dedication and the love for her son counted for nothing. Mr. Thompson prepared for the most important meeting of his career, unaware that the solution to his most urgent problem lay precisely in the boy he had deemed a mere obstacle to corporate productivity. The days after Sarah's dismissal were a study in painful contrasts. While she faced the brutal reality of being jobless in New York, sending resumes that seemed to disappear into a black hole, counting every dollar at the supermarket, trying to explain to Ethan why they would need to move out of the apartment they loved, Mr. Thompson navigated a sea of corporate crises threatening to sink his company. Innovate Corp was facing its biggest challenge since its founding. A nationwide school project, the Future Innovators Challenge, into which the company had invested millions in marketing and sponsorship, was about to become a public relations disaster. The digital evaluation system they were building for the event had critical failures, and the demonstration for the press and investors was scheduled for a few days away. Mr. Thompson gathered his most talented engineers, his most expensive consultants, his most seasoned managers. No one could fix the issue. The code had a fundamental flaw that corrupted student project data, and every attempted fix created new problems. We need a solution, not excuses. Mr. Thompson roared in a tense meeting, his face marked by frustration and sleepless nights. We have invested too much in this project to let it fail. Meanwhile, in the small Brooklyn apartment, Ethan watched his mother fight back tears as she reviewed bills at the kitchen table. He saw the weight she carried, not only financial worry, but the deep wound of the injustice she had suffered. And in his 12-year-old heart, a determination began to grow. "Mom," he said one night, while she reread yet another dismissal email, "let me look at that Innovate Corp system problem. I heard you talking about it before. Well, before." Sarah looked at him, her tired eyes showing a mixture of love and concern. "Sweetheart, that is too complex for you. These are corporate systems, not your computer games." But Ethan insisted. He had paid attention to the technical problems she had mentioned casually over dinner, before the dismissal. And in his young, brilliant mind, patterns began to take shape, patterns that the adult engineers at Innovate Corp could not see. While Mr. Thompson faced the imminent collapse of his most important project, receiving bad news after bad news from his technical team, Ethan worked secretly on his old laptop in the bedroom he shared with his mother. Using programming skills he had developed on his own through online tutorials and library books, he began to analyze the issue that paralyzed a billion-dollar corporation. The irony was almost tangible. The same boy whose health Mr. Thompson had deemed insignificant was about to become the only person able to save the project the company had staked so much on. The same maternal love that had been treated as a professional inconvenience was about to produce the most valuable solution. David, Sarah's compassionate colleague, learned of Mr. Thompson's desperation through the office grapevine. And he remembered something Sarah had mentioned months earlier, that Ethan had an extraordinary talent for programming, that he solved complex problems that challenged even college students. With a heavy heart over the injustice he had witnessed, David did something that could cost him his own job. He called Sarah. "Sarah, I know this is asking a lot," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "But the school project is falling apart, and Mr. Thompson is desperate. I remember you saying that Ethan, well, that he has a gift for this." Sarah hesitated. The wound from the dismissal was still fresh, the humiliation still raw. Why should she help the man who had treated her with such contempt? It was Ethan who answered, listening from the bedroom door. "I can help. Mom, I already know what the problem is." Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, received what he considered the last piece of bad news. The lead technical consultant hired to save the project gave up, declaring the problem unsolvable in the time available. The press demo would have to be canceled, which would mean not only a massive financial loss, but irreparable damage to Innovate Corp's reputation. At that moment of absolute desperation, David stepped into his office, his face showing a mix of fear and resolve. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands, "I may have a solution. but you will not like where it comes from." What followed was a scene of cosmic humiliation. Mr. Thompson, the billionaire who commanded corporate empires, was forced to hear that the only hope of saving his million-dollar project lay in the hands of the 12-year-old son of the woman he had fired for putting that very child above work. The irony could not have been sharper, nor the lesson clearer. The moral universe, it seems, has a particularly sharp sense of humor and an unerring precision in making us reap exactly what we sow. And while Mr. Thompson wrestled with the humiliation of having to ask help from those he most despised, Sarah and Ethan in Brooklyn faced a battle of their own, not against poverty or unemployment, but against the resentment that threatened to keep them from offering a hand to someone who least deserved their compassion. The web of consequences was tightening, and Mr. Thompson was about to discover that some lessons are learned not in boardrooms, but in the hard school of forced humility. When Mr. Thompson finally crossed the Brooklyn Bridge toward the modest apartment that housed the only hope of saving his corporate empire, he carried not only the shame of asking help from the woman he had fired, he carried the crushing weight of realizing that every rung on his ladder to success had been built on the very compassion he had always considered a weakness in business. Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn was everything Mr. Thompson was not: modest, authentic, full of life despite hardship. As he climbed the stairs of the old building, every creak seemed to echo the rash judgments that had brought him there. Peeling paint, a dim hallway, the smell of home-cooked food drifting from other apartments, all of it a brutal reminder of the real world he had forgotten in his ivory tower in Manhattan. Sarah opened the door, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. In her eyes, Mr. Thompson saw not only the pain of the recent dismissal, but the years of silent sacrifice he had never acknowledged. And beside her, Ethan looked at him with a serenity disconcerting for a 12-year-old, the serenity not of childish innocence, but of a deep understanding Mr. Thompson did not yet possess. "Miss Jenkins," he began, his voice stripped of the authority he usually projected through Innovate Corp's corridors. "I need your help." The simplicity of the statement was more powerful than any corporate speech. Mr. Thompson, the man who ran meetings with billionaire investors, could not find the right words to explain why he stood in the humble apartment of the woman he had dismissed. It was Ethan who broke the tense silence. "It is about the bug in the evaluation system, is it not? The data corruption problem on the student projects." Mr. Thompson froze. The boy not only knew the problem, he described it with the technical precision his most seasoned engineers had failed to reach. "How did you?" Mr. Thompson began, but the words died in his throat. Ethan smiled, not a smile of triumph, but the quiet smile of someone who has always known that true knowledge does not come from titles or salaries. "I heard Mom talk about the issues at dinner, and I started studying similar systems online. The problem is not in the code. It is in the data architecture." As Ethan laid out the solution with a clarity that would shame any high-priced consultant, Mr. Thompson had a bruising moment of insight. He saw not only a prodigy, but the product of the love and sacrifice he had despised. Every night Sarah worked late and still helped Ethan with homework. Every weekend she sacrificed to take him to the library. Every dollar she saved to buy programming books. All of it had culminated in the bright mind now saving his company from ruin. Sarah watched with her arms crossed, her face a mixture of maternal pride and lingering hurt. "Why should we help you, Mr. Thompson? After what you did?" The question rang through the small apartment like a judgment. Mr. Thompson looked at her, then at Ethan, then finally at his own hands, the same hands that had signed the termination that threatened to destroy this family. "I do not have an answer that is good enough," he admitted, his voice now carrying a vulnerability no one at Innovate Corp had ever seen. "All I can say is that I was wrong. Wrong about you, wrong about your priorities, wrong about what truly matters." Ethan, who had returned to his technical explanation, paused and looked at Mr. Thompson with a wisdom beyond his years. "Mom always tells me people make mistakes. She says what matters is not the mistake, but what we do after we realize it." The simplicity of a truth spoken by a child was more devastating than any adult reprimand. Mr. Thompson felt the walls of his arrogance crumble, revealing the loneliness of a man who had spent a lifetime believing success meant standing above others, not beside them. "The project," he started, but Sarah cut in. "The project can wait. What cannot wait is you understanding why you are here. You are not here just to save your company. You are here to save yourself from becoming the man my mother always warned me not to become, someone who values numbers more than people." Mr. Thompson sank into a kitchen chair, his body bowed under the weight of truths he had avoided his entire career. He looked around the apartment, the photos of Ethan on the wall, the carefully stacked books, the old computer where a 12-year-old genius worked, the mother who had sacrificed everything so her son could have opportunities she never had. And in a flash of understanding that would change his life, Mr. Thompson realized that the greatest mistake of his career was not firing Sarah. It was failing to see the extraordinary value that had always been before him. Not only in Ethan's talent, but in Sarah's character, in the resilience that kept her going when the world gave her every reason to stop. "I do not deserve your help," he said at last, the words coming like a confession. "But I need it. And more importantly, I need to learn from you. I need to understand how I became the kind of man who fires a mother for caring for her sick child." True redemption began in that moment, not with promises of reinstatement or raises, but with the humble recognition that success without humanity is the most complete failure there is. And Mr. Thompson, the billionaire who had always had all the answers, was finally learning to ask the right questions. The lesson was not being taught in a boardroom with a view of Manhattan, but in a modest Brooklyn apartment, and the most effective teacher was not an expensive consultant, but a single mother and her 12-year-old son, proving that some truths are so simple they make all others seem complex. When Ethan finally solved the problem that had paralyzed Innovate Corp, he did not offer only a technical fix. He offered Mr. Thompson a moral choice: remain the man who valued profit over people, or become someone who understood that true corporate success is measured not in balance sheets, but in lives transformed and second chances given. The solution Ethan presented was as elegant as it was devastating in its simplicity. While Manhattan's highest-paid engineers wrestled with complex code and bloated architectures, the 12-year-old from Brooklyn identified the fundamental flaw: the system was trying to do too much with too little, lost in its own ambition. It is like trying to build a skyscraper without solid foundations. Ethan explained, his fingers moving over the old keyboard with a confidence Mr. Thompson had never seen in his most experienced employees. You are adding floors without checking whether the foundation can hold them. Mr. Thompson watched, fascinated and humbled at once. Every line of code Ethan wrote was not just a technical correction, but a silent refutation of everything he believed about talent, merit, and worth. The boy he had considered an obstacle to productivity was doing in an hour what entire teams had failed to do in weeks. But the true revolution was not happening on the computer screen. It was happening in Mr. Thompson's heart. As he watched mother and son work together, Sarah bringing juice for Ethan, asking smart questions, offering insights born of years of administrative experience, he saw what had always been missing from his company: genuine humanity. When the system finally ran flawlessly, delivering an efficiency that exceeded the most optimistic expectations, the silence that followed meant more than any celebration. "It is done," Ethan said simply, turning in his chair to face Mr. Thompson. But fixing the technical problem was the easy part. The hard part is what you will do now. Sarah stepped closer, placing her hands on her son's shoulders. Her eyes met Mr. Thompson's, and for the first time, he did not see anger or resentment. He saw something far more demanding: compassion. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you have a choice. You can take this solution, go back to Manhattan, save your project, and remain the same man you were. Or you can use this opportunity to become someone better." Mr. Thompson felt the words like physical blows. He looked at the humble apartment that housed so much wisdom, at the mother who had sacrificed everything for her child, at the boy who understood more about true leadership than any master of business administration, MBA, graduate. "I want to change," he said, and for the first time in his life, the words did not sound like a corporate cliché, but a genuine confession. "But I do not know where to begin." Ethan offered the direction. "Begin by understanding that companies are made of people, not numbers. And that some people, like my mother, are worth more than any quarterly profit." The journey back to Manhattan was the loneliest of Mr. Thompson's life. Every bridge he crossed, every skyscraper that came into view, reminded him of the ivory tower he had built, one where humanity was negotiable and compassion was considered weakness. The next morning, when he entered Innovate Corp headquarters, something fundamental had changed. Employees who normally shrank in his presence saw something different in his eyes, not the usual coldness, but a newly found vulnerability. The demonstration of the repaired system was a resounding success. Investors and journalists were impressed not only by the technical solution, but by the way Mr. Thompson publicly credited a brilliant young mind from Brooklyn for the innovation. For the first time in his career, he celebrated not only the result, but the human source behind it. But the real transformation happened after the applause faded. Mr. Thompson called David into his office. "I want you to help me make some changes," he said, his voice carrying a determination David had never heard before. "Starting with bringing Sarah back. But not as she was." The plan Mr. Thompson laid out was as radical as it was redemptive. Sarah would not only be reinstated, she would become the director of organizational culture, with triple the salary, flexible hours to care for Ethan, and the authority to implement policies that prioritized employee well-being over blind productivity. When Mr. Thompson personally went to the Brooklyn apartment to make the offer, he brought not only a contract, he brought a newly discovered understanding of leadership. "Sarah," he said when she opened the door, "I am not here to offer a job. I am here to ask you to help me build a company where no mother has to choose between a sick child and her livelihood. Where no employee is judged for their circumstances, but valued for their character." Sarah looked at him, then at Ethan, who watched with a quiet smile. She saw not just a repentant boss, but a man who had finally understood that true legacy is found not in what we accumulate, but in what we share. "I accept," she said, her hands meeting Mr. Thompson's not as employee and boss, but as partners on a journey to rediscover humanity in business. And in that handshake in the humble Brooklyn apartment, something extraordinary was born, not only a second chance for Sarah, but a new definition of success for Mr. Thompson. A definition that understood the most successful companies are not those that make the most money, but those that create the most meaning. And that sometimes, the most important lessons of corporate life are learned not in boardrooms, but in modest apartments, taught not by expensive consultants, but by resilient mothers and wise children who remind the powerful that true value is never lived in balance sheets, but always in human hearts. In the months following Sarah Jenkins's triumphant return to Innovate Corp, something extraordinary began to happen in corridors that once echoed only with unbridled ambition and fierce competition. A quiet revolution that did not come from corporate restructurings or new technologies, but from the painful rediscovery that companies are made of people, and that healed people create healthy cultures, no matter how many zeros sit in quarterly reports. Sarah's first 60 days as director of organizational culture were a study in collective cognitive dissonance. Innovate Corp, once a temple of Wall Street capitalism where metrics were gods and profit was sacred scripture, now witnessed a quiet transformation defying every established corporate paradigm. Sarah did not take an executive office. She chose an open desk in the middle of the workspace, where anyone could approach her at any time. Her first official act was to eliminate executive restrooms, declaring that human dignity has no hierarchy. Her second was to implement flexible schedules for parents and caregivers, recognizing that life happens outside the office. Mr. Thompson, once the unyielding defender of productivity at any cost, had become the most vocal champion of the new policies. He did not merely approve the changes, he lived them. He arrived later on Mondays to accompany Sarah and Ethan to medical appointments, left earlier on Fridays to attend the boys' school presentations, and for the first time in his career, he spoke openly about his own humanity in meetings. The deepest change, however, happened in the hallways and break rooms. Employees who once competed fiercely for promotions now collaborated genuinely. People who had hidden personal struggles for fear of being seen as weak now shared their burdens and received support. The fear that had permeated the corporate culture was being replaced by something far more powerful: trust. Ethan, meanwhile, had become a regular presence at the company, not as an employee's child, but as a respected junior consultant. His young mind brought fresh perspectives that challenged established corporate thinking, and his relationship with Mr. Thompson evolved from circumstantial adversary to something resembling mentored friendship. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, Mr. Thompson called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. It was not a quarterly gathering to celebrate financial results. It was something rarer and more precious. In the last 2 months, Mr. Thompson began, his voice carrying not the authority of a chief executive officer, but the vulnerability of a man who had learned something fundamental. We have collectively discovered that it is possible to build a billion-dollar company on values that have no price. And that priceless values, when genuinely lived, create a moral wealth no balance sheet can capture. He then did something no one had seen a Wall Street leader do. He called Sarah to the stage. Not as an employee to be praised, but as an equal to share the space. Sarah taught me that caring for a sick child with love is worth more than closing any deal within humanity. Mr. Thompson continued, his eyes meeting those of hundreds of employees. She showed me that the silent sacrifice of a single mother demonstrates more leadership than any title on a business card. Sarah, dressed not in an expensive executive outfit but in the modest professional clothes she had always worn, now by choice, not necessity, looked over the sea of faces that had once ignored her. For 6 years, she said, her voice soft but carrying a moral authority no leadership training could teach, I witnessed the human cost of traditional corporate success. I saw colleagues follow from stress, families break under overwork, brilliant talents burned out by relentless pressure. And through it all, one thing became clear to me: success that excludes humanity is the most complete failure there is. As Sarah spoke, something extraordinary moved through the audience. Employees who once avoided her eyes now looked with genuine admiration. People who had measured their worth by bonuses and titles now questioned those metrics in silence. The invisible hierarchy governing their interactions began to crumble, replaced by something more fundamental: the recognition of intrinsic human value. David, watching from the front row, felt tears gather. He remembered the Sarah humiliated in the lobby months earlier and saw the transformed woman who now inspired an entire corporation. The poetic justice could not have been more perfect. But the quiet revolution was also in the numbers. In the 2 months since the new policies were implemented, Innovate Corp's productivity had risen by 18%, absenteeism had dropped by 32%, and employee satisfaction reached record levels. The same people Mr. Thompson had once labeled lazy or distracted when they faced personal challenges were now producing superior work because they felt valued as whole human beings. Ethan, sitting beside Mr. Thompson, watched with bright eyes. "You see?" he whispered to the leader. "When you treat people like humans, they give you their best as professionals. It is simple math, really." Mr. Thompson laughed, a genuine laugh no one at the company had ever heard. "You are 12 and you understand more about people management than I do after 30 years in business." The transformation did not stop with employees. It seeped into the structure of the company itself. Promotion policies that once prioritized results at any cost now included assessments of character and support for colleagues. Bonus programs that rewarded aggressive competition were replaced with incentives for collaboration and mentorship. Even clients noticed the difference. Instead of robotic service and rigid protocols, they experienced genuine human connection, with employees no longer afraid to show empathy or flexibility. Sarah watched from her open desk, not with the satisfaction of an executive executing a plan, but with the humility of a woman who had discovered that the most powerful solutions do not come from expensive consultants or complex business models, but from the brutal simplicity of treating people as whole human beings, not resources. The lesson became clear to everyone at Innovate Corp. When you heal the moral wounds at the top, the entire organization begins to heal. And the most disruptive innovation is not a technology, but the rediscovery that healthy companies are made of healthy people, and healthy people create healthy results, not only financially, but humanly. And Mr. Thompson, the involuntary architect of this transformation, kept learning each day that true power is not in commanding, but in serving, and that the most meaningful service a leader can offer is to create an environment where every person can flourish not only as a professional, but as a complete human being. The quiet revolution was underway, and its impact would be felt far beyond Innovate Corp's walls, proving that when a company rediscovers its soul, it does not just thrive, it becomes something far greater than itself. 1 year after that fateful morning that began with an unjust firing in Innovate Corp's lobby and ended with corporate hierarchies being dismantled by inescapable moral truths, the company was no longer the same, not because its profits had grown or its valuation had soared, but because something rarer and more precious had happened. It had rediscovered its own soul, and in the process proved that the true legacy of any corporation is not in the zeros on its balance sheet, but in the lives it touches and transforms along the way. Autumn in New York brought not only the vibrant colors painting Central Park, but the full harvest of the seeds planted during that transformative crisis a year earlier. Innovate Corp., once a symbol of relentless Wall Street capitalism where people were resources and values were metrics, now breathed a different air, a peculiar blend of technical excellence and genuine humanity that defied every established corporate convention. Sarah Jenkins still held the role of Director of Organizational Culture, and her open desk in the heart of the workspace remained her chosen post. She moved through the corridors not as an executive supervising, but as a curator connecting. Her steady presence reminded everyone that values do not live in manuals or slide decks, but in daily interactions between real people. Her modest style became not a symbol of forced humility, but a powerful statement that true worth needs no expensive adornment to be recognized. Ethan, now 13, attended a school for young technology talents, not because Mr. Thompson covered an exorbitant tuition, but because Innovate Corp created a scholarship program based not on academic metrics, but on proven character and genuine passion for learning. He was already developing his first app to help children with asthma monitor their health, inspired by his own experience and by his mother's example that genuine care is worth more than any professional prestige. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, watched from his remodeled office, now an open space where anyone could step in to talk, with no appointments and no hierarchy. His eyes, once fixed on growth charts and market projections, now shone when he witnessed small acts of kindness sprouting across the organization. he discovered that seeing an intern genuinely welcomed by seasoned colleagues brought a satisfaction deeper than any billion-dollar contract ever had. At a special ceremony marking the first anniversary of the transformation, Mr. Thompson delivered a speech that would be remembered as the moment Innovate Corp truly redefined itself. A year ago, he began, his voice carrying an emotion everyone felt was genuine. "I fired an extraordinary woman not for incompetence, but for prioritizing her sick child over a corporate meeting. On that day, I believed I was defending the company's standards. Today I understand I was defending my own moral blindness." He then revealed something that surprised even Sarah. "In the past 12 months, our valuation has grown by 27%, an impressive number any leader would celebrate. But there are other numbers I consider far more significant. 89 is the number of employees who reported feeling genuinely seen and valued for the first time in their careers. 34 is the number of stories of spontaneous collaboration that changed significant projects. And 3, that is the number of times we had to intervene in major conflicts, compared with 41 the year before." The numbers did not lie. The company was more profitable, more innovative, more resilient. But the truest success shone in the faces of employees who now came to work not out of obligation, but out of purpose. In families who ate dinner together because parents no longer had to stay late to prove their worth. In the neighborhoods nearby that benefited from volunteer programs that had become part of the organizational culture. Sarah, in her brief reply, said little. Her actions had always spoken louder than words. But what she did say resonated in every heart. "For 6 years, I thought I was building a future for my son. Now I see I was also clearing space for better futures to grow for everyone. And I have learned that when you lead with the heart, you do not only transform cultures, you allow humanity to bloom where there was only ambition." The legacy of that transformative crisis did not live in corporate manuals or business case studies. It lived in the custodian's daughter who now dreamed of becoming a chief executive officer not to accumulate power, but to spread compassion. It lived in the former arrogant executive who found more joy in mentoring an intern than in closing a massive deal. It lived in the billionaire who discovered that his greatest achievement was not his technology empire, but helping to build a culture where every person, regardless of title or salary, felt worthy and valued. When the event ended and the auditorium lights dimmed, Mr. Thompson lingered, watching Sarah and Ethan speak with employees from every level. His gaze traveled across the space he knew so well, not as a leader surveying his company, but as a man contemplating the cathedral of values he had helped to build. He then walked to Sarah and Ethan, not as a boss to employees, but as a friend to friends. "I will never be able to thank you enough for what you have done for me," he said, his voice filled with a genuine feeling that still surprised him. "You did not only save my company, you saved me from myself." Sarah smiled, her face reflecting not triumph but understanding. "We only showed the way. Michael, you found the courage to walk it." Ethan, ever practical, added, "And the work is not done. There are many companies out there that need to learn the same lesson." In that moment, a new purpose took root in all three hearts, not only to keep transforming Innovate Corp, but to spread the quiet revolution to other corporations, proving that business success and humanity are not opposites, but essential partners. The final legacy of that journey was not in balance sheets or valuations, but in the fundamental truth that when we treat people not as resources, but as complete human beings with lives, families, dreams, and struggles, we create not only more successful companies, but a more human world. And what legacy, in the end, could be more enduring than that?